What up? My name is Gildy. I am General Manager for Team Nuclear, and welcome back to another Chalk Talk. Today, I'm going to be focusing on Route 66. This is our first escort map that we're doing as part of this little series, and escort is different from assault, which is the last game mode. It's different from assault in that the objective, A, is mobile through the entire map, and B, it's a much smaller area. So most of the time, if you've got control point versus payload, the control point is going to be much wider. You have a lot more area to work with in terms of what constitutes playing around the objective. With the payload, because the objective moves along the track the whole time, and because the radius around which you're considered contesting or playing the objective is a lot smaller, that means we kind of have to rethink how we play. And a lot of it is going to be putting the payload in the spot where we want to take the most advantageous fight. If you're on attack, the payload kind of dictates where you want to play around because you want to guard the payload, you want to at least keep it moving or prevent it from rolling back. If you're on defense, it is actually okay to give up progress on the payload in order to get an advantageous fight. And that's probably the biggest thing that I see a lot of, especially in quick play and lower rank solo queue. I see a lot of teams, especially on defense, just kind of throw themselves at the payload because they can't afford to give away a lot of extra progress. Now, there are certain situations where if the payload is 5 or 10 meters from being game over, like that's the entire map just lost, that situation is going to be a little bit different. But in general, if you're on defense, especially if you're on defense first, like the first rotation during a comp, you want to be taking advantageous fights and you want to be putting the payload in specific situations where you control a corner. And payload is going to feature several different types of corners. It's going to feature usually all three types of the corner situations, which I'm just going to draw right here. We've got the single corner, which is this first one. We've got the double offset corner, which is that middle one. And then we've got the double same side corner, which is that bottom one. The reason I wanted to start with Route 66 actually is because unlike a lot of other escort maps or the streets phase of hybrid maps, this map actually contains a lot of single corner situations. There's not a whole lot of double corner action happening, and I'll explain why that is. It's just due to the nature of how straight this map is for long stretches of time. There's really only a couple of corners that are, I'd say, critical to playing the map well. So we're going to zoom in here on the first point. The first point, I'm going to highlight a couple things that are sort of key areas of this map. The first of which I'm going to highlight the gas station. This is probably the part of point A that defines it. It's the big central feature, and it's going to be most critical to success of either team, and I'll get to that in a second. The other thing that I'm going to point out is just the nature of how these it's really three long straightaways. You've got straightaway 1, straightaway 2, and then straightaway 3. If we look at this as a series of straightaways, it's really easy to identify what the corners are. The first corner is going to be this right here around I don't know the technical term for it. I'm going to call it the butte, like around this first corner. And then the second one is this top corner of the gas station. I'm going to clean this up a little bit for y'all. So those two are really the main corners on this map. You'll see a lot of times in lower ranks and quick plays where you've got defensive teams that will set up right here along this corner, or they'll have DPS set up here on the bridge. And this isn't a terrible strategy because pretty much what you're doing is you're denying the attack the only real good corner that they have to play off of. You have control of this giant straightaway looking at the start of cart, the start of their spawn. The problem that I would say with this position, and which is why I'm not going to recommend it, is ultimately you are very, very, very far away from any kind of cover. If you get pushed up, dove, and the attacking team just sort of steps off of payload and deals with your position, the next places that you can go are all the way back here, or along the next straightaway. That rotate is insanely long. It pretty much guarantees you that you're going to have a lost fight. So, where ideally do you want to be taking the fights if you're on defense on Route 66? Well, you'll see a lot of teams in comp, they'll actually set up on the gas station. And this is a really, really, really good thing to do because you've got the sign right here on the gas station that provides some cover. You can poke, you can spam through the corner on this straightaway. You're still able to play this first corner. You just don't have quite the same degree of control over the objective. The real power in holding up on the gas station, and I'll talk about this in a second, is because you want the payload to end up, hold on, let me get a color here. You want the payload to end up right there. This is the ideal spot for the defense to have the payload. And why is this? If everybody on defense is up top on the gas station, when the payload hits that corner, look at this. You're able to all drop down and you're in that surround team fight position that I always talk about as being critical to winning the team fight. You want to be on the outer ring of this position. Holding the gas station allows you to do that. It allows you to poke as the payload gets all the way up on the thing. And like I said, it's better to have a advantageous fight than it is to completely stop the payload, because it's a lot easier to hold the payload than it is to try and stop it mid-progress in a exposed area, especially once you stagger yourself. It's the easiest way to like have really bad defenses on escort is to not focus on playing the map and getting the payload in a position that's very easy for you to defend. Because the other thing to think about is on escort, I talk about in the first video how there's really two sides to every team fight. There's the passive side, which wants to stay in its position and have very little change about it. And then you have the aggressive side. On assault, the attack is almost always the aggressive side. There's not much to holding a position on attack. On defense, you're almost always passive. On escort, it's kind of flipped. It depends on who controls the payload. On defense, until you get a full stop on the payload, you're always the aggressive side. And so what you want to be looking for is opportunities to create this exact surround position. And a lot of times it's going to be hold high ground, poke until the payload gets to a specific point, and then jump down and collapse onto the point. In the event that this doesn't work, chances are that is point A for, point A for the offense. Point A is kind of offense-sided as well, because if you think about it, once they get past this first corner right here, it's really easy. The offense has a ton of options to sort of recontest you on high ground. And I'm going to point some of these out because I want to talk about what the offense can do, what attack can do, if they get a situation where the payload is full held. So in general, obviously, you can still go up main, you can still hug the gas station, but technically speaking, you want to be playing the gas station as well, because once you lose control of the payload, you're on the aggressive side. I would say that better options could be going in through this tunnel right here because you have a sight line over top the gas station, or going the long way and playing around the corner like this, getting up to the gas station that way. And if you look at it, if you ignore the blue arc right there, if the payload's at that corner and you effectively manage these positions, you've achieved the surround. You're actually in that position that I like to talk about. You have a lot of options on attack. Ultimately, I'd say it comes down to your composition, and in a future video, I'll talk about different things that compositions want to accomplish. In general, I don't think there's really a bad route to take. The one thing to be careful, though, is that if you do elect to go right up main like this, is that you're going to have to invest a lot of shields in order to make it to the corner to contest. I would say it's a lot easier to either go the side routes. I would advise against the middle just because, again, you're going to have to invest a lot of important stuff in order to actually make it to the corner. One other quick thing I'll point out on point A is that a lot of times teams will, especially in lower ranks, especially in quick plays, will try and recontest when the payload is basically at the point. And it's understandable because, again, the reflex is you don't want to give up any capture progress. If you are going to try and recontest, if it's a situation where they're like 5 meters from getting a victory, what really needs to happen is the team needs to group, and you need to go through all 3 of these entryways at once, particular this lower high ground one. Sorry, this bottom high ground one, bottom as I'm looking on the map. Because again, you want to try and get yourself in that surround position. In general, I'd say if the payload makes it around this corner, it's probably better to just give it up and get set for point 2, because point 2 is actually probably what decides this map in a lot of ways, and I'll explain why that is. All right, so moving on to point 2. Similar to point A, how I said the gas station is kind of what determines it. This high ground that I'm highlighting in yellow is really what controls point 2. And there's a couple reasons for it. It's because similar to the gas station on point A, once the cart gets to this corner right here is when the defense ideally wants to drop down as a team and take this surround position around the cart. They're able to basically cut off the entire enemy, and with good target focusing, that is a easy one fight. You've got the payload stopped. And the reason for that is I said this map is basically a lot of one corner situations. The only real corner for defense on point 2 is this corner right up here, and it's on the ledge, and there's a couple reasons for it. Some people could say that the corner is actually down here. It's this lower one, but there's a problem with this. If you set up down low, yeah, you have sightlines over main, and you can watch this underneath rotate spot. A lot of times teams will, especially if they've just lost a fight, will stagger and they'll stay to the right. But there's a problem. You don't have sightlines over this. There's a doorway right here. I wish I might see if I can't get a picture of what it looks like from down below. But you have no idea what the attackers are going to do if they go up top to the right. And if they're able to make it all the way in here, they actually are going to challenge you. And if you're sitting down below, they will get into the surround position. And that's not what you want on defense. So my recommendation, you'll see a lot of Overwatch League teams will do this, is to set up right along here. They'll play the corner right up top, and they'll stay on the wooden ledge. And there's a reason for this. Because you still get to spam down the payload, as you still get to do the same kind of poke. You have the same kind of look at this little entry, underway entry, and I'll explain why the underway can be helpful in a sec. And it's important that you're able to watch that, but more importantly, you actually do have sight lines over the doorway. It's a pretty narrow sight line, but it is one that's really useful nonetheless. So if you're the attackers, what are you trying to look for here? Ultimately, I would say the best thing to do, and this goes for point A as well, is to have 6 on the payload and be ready for the drop. Be ready for when inevitably the defensive team is going to surround you. Watch out for the high value targets that are diving. Ultimately, I would say it's very rare that you're going to have a payload map on attack where you don't have one complete full stop. Point 2, I would say the best thing to do is try and deal with the poke, maybe try and get a pick and make it harder for the defense's surround to work. But let's say that in this situation, the payload does get stopped and you do get stuck right here at the corner. What are really your options? Well, I'm going to highlight them. You have going right up main. You have, actually, I'm going to split this right side into 2. You have coming underneath and up the stairs, going above and around the stairs like this, or, and you don't see this super often, coming around behind in this direction. I would say that on the first push, once you've gotten the payload, the best thing for your tanks to do is to push up main, take space, and try and do your best to set up here, make space, and force the enemy team down to challenge you. But like I said, a lot of times it's not really something that's completely preventable, because again, your job is to try and deny the defense control of this corner right here. And it's hard to do that once you've just pushed the payload. But if you've lost the payload, I would say the first thing to try would actually be to take this high ground on the right, especially if the payload didn't make it very far past the corner. Why do I say this? Because once you've established yourself up top, you're able to directly challenge on the same level. You'll be able to directly challenge that position. If you get a good push over the bridge, you're actually able to push them off and into this wide open area where they have no cover, no corners to play with. And once you've gotten there, you're actually in that surround position. So that's really the goal, is to disrupt and push them off of this high ground here. If the enemy defense is not taking it, by all means, it's your most valuable weapon on attack here. It's what's going to save you. Let's talk real quick about the difference between these two paths. So the advantage with this underneath path where you're going, on this underneath path where you're going and you get direct access to the point, to the high ground, is that it's a lot faster than going underneath. If you go underneath, you kind of have to do some snaky, tricky stuff. The disadvantage with it is if they have control over this doorway right here, if the defense has sightlines over your doorway, this is kind of a kill corridor, especially with poke comps like an Ariso or an Ash. Junkrats and Ash Dynamites can be really brutal there. So it would depend on the enemy's composition. I would say a safer route that still gets you the same high ground positioning is to go this one right here. Because even though you're lower down to start, there we go. Even though you're lower down to start, this is not as much of a kill corridor. And if you're able to use a Reinhardt shield or even a Lucio boost to get underneath and up to the stairs, that makes it pretty easy and pretty safe to get up and challenge to the high ground position. So that's in the situation where if the defense does its job and it gets the payloads stopped there. But there are going to be times where, and this happens quite frequently, where the payload actually gets probably here and forward, but the defense still gets a hold on it. I would say in that option, this is probably when it's good to break out this far left path. Why do I say this? Because ultimately, if the defense wants to hold this corner right here, but your payload's well past the corner, you don't need to play around that corner at all. You just need to get behind the defense and start moving the payload again. So in the event where the payload is kind of past the big red structure in the middle, I would actually say going this far left group path as a team, create space, set up a front line in this direction. I'm going to change the color here. Set up a front line in this direction while you have other characters back capping and moving the point that way. Actually gets you in a really, really solid position because you're denying the advantage of the enemy's high ground. The only thing to really keep in mind is at this point, some defenses, especially once teams get staggered, are going to start flowing in from this high ground. And so I wouldn't say completely turn around. I'd say still be aware of this upper path. But this walkway along here is not nearly as powerful as the red structure in the center. So a lot of teams, if they do give up the red structure in the center, it's really, really easy to punish if they start to use less advantageous high ground. Because if you think about it, this red building has a lot of corners that you can play around. And like I said, corner is just kind of a code word for natural cover. If you're up here on the walkway, you're really exposed for the whole thing. Yes, you have high ground, but you're not actually protected by anything. You're just kind of there, which is why I would say that's why this walkway up here is not really a part of the highlighted sort of key high ground that I talked about. It's just because it's really exposed, and even though it is high ground, you're not going to be protected. And on either side, that's what you're looking for, is staying protected. So moving on to point 3 right here. Point 3, very similar to the last couple. There's really only one corner, and it's this one. There are some options that the defense has as the payload gets closer to the checkpoint, and I'll talk about those. Again, if you're the defense, if you give up point 2, it is easy to sort of get in the they've only got 1 point left, and that's the end of the map. That's the end of their attack. Again, I would say it's far more important to get an advantageous position than it is to completely deny payload progress in most situations. There's no always, no never, but most of the time it's a lot better to have an easier fight than it is to try and stop the payload completely, because a lot of times you're just not going to have the positioning you need. So really the thing with this this third point is it's a very vertical point. And I say that because the payload track is down below, but there's not a whole lot that isn't vertical that provides cover. So I say that this right here is the main corner because what it allows the defense to do if they get set up here, it allows for decent poke down the choke. You've got good sight lines over potential alternate routes that the attackers can take, and it's a pretty strong safe position. Another one that I'd say is good is setting up right here on the truck, because again, you want to be playing the vertical elements of this map. That's where a lot of the cover is going to be. It's not about hiding behind boxes or walls. It's actually going to be using the vertical element to sort of stay far enough back and stay safe. The key thing here for attack, and this is something to remember on defense, is you actually have, this probably point has the most options for you to take, because among going left, right, and center, so you've got main, obviously. You've got this left path, but once you go left, you can do really a couple things. You can come underneath like this. You've got the high ground like that you can run. If you talk about this right side, once you get into this room, this decision point here, you can come like this. You can directly challenge the bunker up top. You can come underneath again. You have so many pathing options on offense that when you're the defending team, you really need to be hyper aware of all of these different routes they can come. A lot of teams will just charge right up main because they're like, oh, we can't abandon the payload. Again, you want to be thinking about your pathing. You want to be thinking about taking the enemy position by surprise. I'm not going to recommend a particular path with this one just because, again, a lot of it depends on where the enemy team decides to set up. A lot of it depends on your composition and what you're trying to accomplish. But ultimately, the thing to remember on attack is point C, you have a lot more options. I would say unless you're running like straight brawl, do not charge right up main. The other reason for this is, let's say you do make it past this first corner. I'm going to erase some of these pink because it's just distracting. The thing to remember is that the defense, if they play this correct, and I'll still talk about what to do if you're on defense and you're in sort of the last stage of this, how you want to be playing. This entire thing, this entire straightaway is a kill corridor for on attack. And so the thing to remember is that if you're just charging straight up main, if you're not thinking about pathing, if you're not thinking about options, you are going to die. Like almost for real. There's not really a way to brute force it up a long straightaway that great without using literally every single piece of utility you have and just risking staggering yourself. So let's say the payload gets past the corner and you're on defense. You're in the last stages of the map. And I'd say last stages is probably here onward, and I'll highlight this. The things to think about, remember I said that this point is a pretty vertical point. And in reality, I sort of hinted at this with the attack because of the amount of options they have. Whoever controls these side areas is going to win point C in any given map, match, or round. Because again, the payload is going to be stuck here in the middle. If you control these side areas, let's say we'll put the payload, I'll make it red this time to sort of distinct it. If you control the side areas, look at this. You've got the surround position around the payload. If you're the attacking team and the defense team is just sitting on payload, they're not worrying about these side paths, it's really, really easy to get into that surround position. If you're on defense, vice versa, you don't need to be watching the payload directly. Obviously, you want to be preventing back capping, but you don't need to be planting 6 men on the payload. If you control those side paths, when the attacking team does inevitably push onto the payload, you're able to turn around, pivot, and all of a sudden they're the ones that are surrounded. I'm not going to give any specific advice for controlling these side areas because, again, a lot of this depends on composition, what the enemy is running. But the real key here on this point, aside from what I'll call main corner right here, is these side areas allow you to create that win condition for a team fight. Controlling those side areas, regardless of what composition you're running, is a absolute must, because every composition at some point is going to have to collapse onto point, and every composition wants to create options. So regardless how they approach those options afterward, you still want to be creating those, and those side routes, the stairs above the truck and then this little side room on the bottom, are going to be absolutely critical to deciding your success on point C. Anyways, that's about all I got for Route 66. If you like this, drop a like, subscribe for more Chalk Talks and scrimmage VODs. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks, good luck, and let's go nuclear.